估计要等出重置才会玩了。希望这船员是真的吧，只能说。对了，这个地方我不知道大家见没见过，我第一次见。这个地方叫实验武器射程，我玩了600多小时，第一次见这个地点。这个地点也是我第一次见到星空里的地对空导弹。星空里确实是有地对空的反飞船武器的，看来只是没见过有人用。但是你说有没有呢？有。这个炮台好像也就这个地方见过。说实话，新亚之类的城市应该也有这种炮台才对，不是吗？到时候我搞个 mod， 把这个资产在新亚安一些，在阿基拉、霓虹都安一些这种大炮台。炮台真不错，等一下咱们来留一张这个，毕竟我要记录嘛。实验性武器射程，其实翻译错了，其实因这个地方叫实验性武器靶场之类的，但是我要给它命名的话，我决定管它叫什么呢？让我想想啊。这个地点，首先让我搜一下我们的地点数据库里，确实应该是没有。让我看一眼，地点名称，武器，确实没有。我们要加一个新的，加一个新的那个，这是属于随机地点吧？应该，它叫做外部名称，把这边设置成 in progress。它本来的名称叫实验武器射程，我们要把这个名字改到，我想想啊，叫做那个地对空导弹炮台实验区，或者就不用叫实验区了吧？有必要叫我先进去看看，有没有什么别的线索。马尔斯之心，你是说那个采矿的任务吗？那个没问题。
Best not to leave anything useful behind.
这大炮台，大卫是谁来着？我都忘了，天，这么热闹。对，城市周边其实都应该有，不知道为啥做了，但是没放。这边有个观察站，确实是个控制炮台的地方。当然，为了更符合原版名称，我们要不要给它稍微改一下？这附近都是武器公司的贴纸。牛奶。哎呦我靠！
Hello, love. I'm sorry to see.
那你要看你问的是哪个是 mod。mod 不少，看一下我给这个地方的命名，最终应该叫做 就试验。哎，是叫什么？测试，对呀，对。测试炮台，这样就能符合它本来的定义了嘛。我们给这个地方加一幅图片。我现在安了一个 mod， 就是我们能带更多的队友，所以可以看到我现在带了这么多，而且我又安了个 mod， 就是让队友的穿不穿宇航服、戴不戴头盔的情况和我完全同步。我身上有宇航服，他们身上就有宇航服；我身上有头盔，他们身上就有头盔。然后我现在带了4人小队，加上一个机器人，就是我、安德烈亚、这个阿梅利亚·埃尔哈特。哈德良以及瓦斯科，我们4人小队加上一个机器人组成的这个叫什么？那个叫什么 Surface Team 之类的。这用质量效应的话来说叫什么来着？我靠！哎呦，忘了哦 ，Shore Party。质量效应的话来说就是那个登陆小队 Shore Party。非常好，非常好。他们都跟着我，哈哈。这个地方还是瞎逛到的，我就说这地方的生成几率太小了。这个真热闹，这才像什么呢？这才像 Commander。是吧？我差点幻视成霓虹城了，不知道为嘛。刚才。现在我们准备前去这个，哎，我怎么超重了？来人！先让你带。
Hello, am I currently in possession? Travel safely.
我们现在要去波江座3继续进行万事计划。我打算给这把枪做一个稍微灰一点的版本，因为你仔细看啊，比如说你看这个它是稍微黄白一点的，其实我觉得这个更好看，但是我打算给和平卫士做一个稍微再发灰一点的涂装，可能会更视觉上会更好。虽然说按理说呀。你在太空里，比如说这把武器设定，那就是在太空里用，那肯定是越白越好，越白反光率越强，越白吸热率越低嘛。所以，但是为了好看的话，我们可以把它弄得稍微灰一点，不要这么白。哎，我飞船。他们在后面打起来了。这喷气背包用的真舒服。求求76，这个更一下吧，能不能？但可能我觉得应该不行，这个应该是1+1 Creation 2的物理引擎升级才弄到的。那 Creation 1。好像应该也就只能做成那样子。现在我们还装了一个沉浸式功能，就是你可以开关那个这个，哎，瓦斯克没上来，你可以开关这个，这也是一个 mod 新出的，你可以控制，就非常有沉浸感。 现在我们要前往波江座3。波江座2已经全面勘探完毕，万事计划继续推进。波江座3好像也是个动植物丰盛的星球，去看看是不是宜居星球。巢穴站收违禁品，然后等你做了海盗任务以后，你可以买，包括你去红里，你可以买到那个隐秘货仓，还有扫描阻断器之类的东西，他们就可以让你走私违禁品进主城。但是如果你现在没有这些东西的话，你就可以直接去这个沃尔夫星，就在太阳系右边，沃尔夫星的巢穴站你是不需要扫描也能去卖违禁品。首先我们来扫描一下波江座3，它的这北极全都是1呀，不是，是亚。我们现在首先要记录一下这个星球的数据情况。这个是星球勘探数据库。也是波江座，也是20，波江座3，这是一颗岩石星球，它的重力，我操，重力1.94，重力2倍。它虽然是它是天堂星球，不，它不是天堂星球，它的水是不安全的。我们对天堂星球的标准是你的水、氧气这些都是必须安全，甚至我觉得光是2倍重力都不能算这个算，但是水是重金属，那绝对不是天堂星球，只能算是叫我什么半宜居星球可以，但是肯定不是天堂星球，这离天堂还差点。但是大气呢是标准氧气啊，大气没有问题。磁层平均没有问题，动植物则是丰富级别，和波江座2只差了1个档次，但是波江座2的水是安全的，这里却不是。这里的资源有水、油、氩在哪里呢？这儿，氩这俩是什么来着？这2个是钚和钒，我们好像没有记过钚这是我们第一个记载钚的星球。对，第一个，这个星球有特别的呀，看似别的就要下降才知道。Shore Party， 准备一下。降落在哪里呢？我都喜欢首先降落到海边，沙漠、海洋。以后如果有个 mod 能允许你降落到海面就好，你要给飞船加一个那种浮力的那个气囊，然后你就可以降落到海面，就飘在那里。我靠，那就有意思。就我不要求有任何东西，我什么东西我都不要求，我就能降到海面，飞船飘在那里，然后我在附近游一游就行了。这样我就满足了，好吧？什么都没有都行，就感受一下那氛围。这个数据是我自己做的图鉴，所以 红光斜坡，巧了，我也是红光斜坡。
Such beauty in the midst of nothing.
这两项我玩了3次，只有第1次不是红光。第1次我选的是绿光，后来我越想越不对劲，那个绿光的结尾让我越来越不知道为什么，这个从心底里有含义。然后之后2次我都是红光。绿光那个所有人眼睛发着绿的实在太诡异了。你听他描述是最好的，什么有机体和这个叫什么来着，合成体建立了共识，但是太诡异了，我只能说，嗯，什么情况？诶，老朋友。哦呦，这什么啊？我操！我靠！你看这个东西好，一抖一抖的那个 shit， 亮龙，这，里面还长毛呢？不对，应该是不是那个蜘蛛的那个蛛网粘的？好像看起来是。我操！我操，这玩意儿有点那个。亮龙大蜘蛛，这死了2只。话说我的那个技能有没有要求我要继续恐吓他们来着？逃跑需要。这 ID 还是很明显，哈哈，那一看就懂。珊瑚蟹，我操！珊瑚蟹在睡觉，泽里斯克上去就给他屁股来了一脚。这电子豆蛐蛐哦，他跑了。电子豆蛐蛐果然有意思哦！哎呦，又顶人家屁股。哇，他这俩原来不是死的，这俩是活的，靠！哎，这个星球的轨地上这什么意思啊？让我想起那个，就是那个什么太阳风暴啊，怎么有点这什么啊？反正不是什么正常事，我只能这么形容。亮龙，我要记载一下这个动物。生物勘探。我现在就喜欢勘探星球，我不知道为什么，但我就是很享受慢慢悠悠的观测这种动物的样子啊，观测它们的生态互动啊，然后给它们拍拍照啊，这种事情不知道为什么特别让我觉得特别放松，非常的舒服。亮龙，它的个性是戒备，资源是色素，冰封沙丘和沙漠。没有别的，无。这个是波江座3，为什么会是2啊？谁写的？波江座3。哦，我懂，是因为这个过滤。那问题了，他跑哪去了？靠！我可以直接在这里面找。蜘蛛，亮龙，不允许少战生产，也不允许非致命收获。那肯定嘛，那必须啊！那终有一天，我现在这个万世计划呀，就是为了这件事而生的嘛。我的万世计划意思就是要勘探所有的世界。这个是有点夸大嘛，毕竟是万千世界，其实是1000世界。但是你好听点就叫万千世界，万世计划。对我看起来其实像 应该不是雨，它溅起来是泥，应该是那种很小很小的。我操！它攻击性好强啊，悍勇。这呜呜。珊瑚蟹，这动植物是我们往那边走。我现在勘探星球的话，一般会以那个地点啊为那种大概方向，但是我的目的反而不是地点，而是路途中间的这些动植物。地点只能算是个 bonus。因为地点是随机的嘛，所以我会把它作为一个向标。而不是目的。海神戟死了，这个海神戟是蓝色的，你可以把它拿起来，看看这小东西，翻转一下，你看还挺弹性的。哎，这边又有2个死了的，一起死了。这个地方的树都是枯树，哎，这个啊，这不是蓝色的吗？你看它带一点淡蓝色，还是挺明显的。这是死了的，量，我操，这么多！说实话，蜘蛛我不想太靠近蜘蛛啊，我对虫子我害怕，靠。沙丘缠结草，这一望无际的沙漠，让人有点晃眼。怎么少了个人啊？走着走着，哎，这不管了，等会儿应该跟得上来。艾克哈特人，在这种星球待久了以后啊，眼里就只有一种颜色。不过我见过一个紫的星球，非常的漂亮。这个东西，真高，我飞上去拍一张。我靠，怎么飞这么久？他们这么高吗？这种东西它虽然是动物的，它其实很像植物，不知道为什么，我只能这么形容它的形态。这个是权杖，权杖是一种分布比较广，你都可以猜测是人类带过去，因为这游戏本体它给你在某些生物上已经挑明了这一点，就是人类传播动物，所以你还真说不准，你可以有理论。搞得这群星组织确实很像科学啊，会提出理论说我们在这个星球发现的，那这是人类带来的吗？也没有，也不一定能否决这个可能性。 毕竟那热质和害变兽都是人类搞的，亚斯里兽是人类搞的，目前挑明的是这2个，而且我滑翔者肯定是人类搞的，没错吧？3个了，别的这些我看可能也是。但是其实这么做不是很危险吗？万一你引起生态灾难怎么办啊？这种入侵物种都别提，地球上不同的生态圈之间都有入侵物种，你从别的星球人为的弄过来，这是不是非常危险？冰封沙丘、沙漠，有些东西可能无害，但是万一这东西有害，繁殖能力巨强，没有天敌，对人类危险啊！这不就是热质和害变兽？那已经有个例子了吗？啊，滑翔者，滑翔者更例子更明显，我靠！还有人挖他的蛋，到处带，你们真有病！氯气那个也是滑翔者。哦，还有那个钻井平台也是滑翔者。滑翔者这东西我很怀疑滑翔者会是以后的一个 DLC， 有可能，我怀疑，因为滑翔者的暗示太多了，多到不对劲。你看氯气是滑翔者，那个钻井平台是滑翔者，这种怪物就经常这种怪物就，然后还有一个矿工挖出来东西被杀光的那个，就是巴雷特那个任务也是滑翔者，全是滑翔者。X269星球如果没记错的话。X269星球到底是哪里？没说，只有个代号，没有星球名。说不定以后 DLC 就让你去 X269星球，然后就是个虫群之心，到时候那就有意思了，都可以做。反正就是他现在埋的这种很多伏笔，以后的 DLC 想做什么都可以。这游戏可以做的追加内容的方向太多，来个那种星河战队的都行。而且伏笔都给你买好了，因为它现在有很多地方，你可以说它有故事，你也可以说它没故事，因为它的故事极其的暗线，就是它的故事是一些小暗示，但它甚至都没有一个完整的一个事情发生。这些东西你可以理解为是暗线叙事，但你也可以理解为都是伏笔，因为它这些伏笔埋下以后想拓展可就容易了。那辐射里也有很多没头没尾的那种暗线故事，不过我觉得滑翔者这事儿没有这么简单，因为它埋的有点多了，不像普通的一段故事就一个地方一个故事，它不是，它有好几个地方涉及到它。这是小珊瑚蟹，小珊瑚蟹，小小的。小小的也很可爱嘛，你看。哎，我操！你就不能听话点吗？真是。我现在才注意到珊瑚蟹为什么叫珊瑚蟹，是因为背上长的这个，我才注意的。之前我们拍珊瑚蟹的照片有捕捉到它这个特点吗？让我看一下。如果没有的话，我要再重拍一张。生物，珊瑚。没登记过珊瑚蟹呀，原来算，那我等会儿登记吧。
Do you see anything useful?
啊，他跟上来了。话说现在有没有那个2分点，还有别的电磁武器和那个粒子炮一样，没给队友也只有电磁伤害的 mod 吗？对，就是让星星炸弹，让2分点电磁板变得和它一样，没有物理伤害给队友有吗？哦，原来这是个 bug， 我还以为。我这么好的群星皮肤，给他们人手发一把，好看疯了。你看这个新星粒子枪不好看啊，我觉得太窄了。 没有那种厚重感。看我手上拿着这个多好看，我靠！这游戏是毕设可以拓展的潜力最高的游戏。一方面是因为它缺的是它可以改进的地方是贝塞出过的游戏里最多的，但是这是为什么呢？是因为它拥有的内容广度和量是贝塞所有的游戏里最多的，所以它能改进的地方是贝塞游戏里最多的，所以它的潜力是贝塞所有的游戏里最多的，这么一个因果关系。我并不认为它缺很多东西是让它变得是一个是贝塞游戏里最不好的，我反而是认为它之所以能有这么多能改进的地方，是因为它有的东西太多了，有的东西是毕设有史以来最多的，所以它才有这么多能改进能加的东西。那么经纬这个呢，它的上限肯定也是最高的，只要他们好好利用。什么玩意儿？看那个球，应该是那个蜘蛛。说实话，不夸张的说，星空如果把现在大家重点说的一些内容改进都给加进来、做进来、改好了，它完全是它就那些部分已经可以成为一个中体量的游戏作品，就已经能成为一个像类似外传一样那种形式的东西，太大了。就你想，它一条任务线多长？一条任务线10个小时，你如果把一条任务线再就是精细的打磨、追加、改进一下，一条线做个20小时，那不就是一个中体量游戏的大小了？我靠！就一条阵营线啊，就这么就真的多。我现在玩了600小时，所以也不用说什么别的了，我感觉是吧？这600小时一周目。也是够了。让他逃跑，但是你先别跑，我要记录一下。他不说要出个官方迷你剧集吗？什么时候出啊？说要合作和他们出一个那个迷你电视剧来着的，我没记错吧？我不是梦里记得的吧？说过吗？我记得有说过，但是我不确定，我总有一种感觉是我梦里梦到的，但是我又有种感觉是说过，我查一下，我现场查一下啊。Starfield， 我怎么记得哪里说过呢 ？Mini TV series， 哎，不可能，我绝对在哪里看到过啊！完了，我的脑子里面清晰的记得，我绝对在哪里看到过新闻，有一家工作室说要和贝塞斯达合作出一个星空的迷你剧系列。我清晰的记得我在哪里的新闻看到过这件事，但是如今我却根本搜不到。那我这个记忆到底是哪来的？啊？我只查到那个动画的，但是不可能啊，不可能啊！我记得的，我觉得，操，完了，完了，根本找不到。但我明明，我真的就这种事情，就是那种，操，怎么可能？就你这种时候，你会开始怀疑自己的记忆的真实性了，包括你会从这一件事开始怀疑 自己很多记忆的真实性。既然你明确的认为自己看到并记得，那这东西呢？没了。The fuck？ 我现在害怕了，我感觉这是不是什么记忆问题的这个前兆啊？啊，怎么会呢？拥有一段自己明明不存在的记忆，但是自己强烈的认为它绝对发生过。shit。怪，这就很恐怖，我只能说。照片，我靠，一堆蜘蛛！这个乌泽里斯克，他的眼睛在哪里啊？他有眼睛吗？他在哪儿呢？哼，没看到。难不成这是眼睛？不会吧！我操，不会吧！我没看到他有眼睛啊！哈，这东西没有眼睛，我靠！记载。他们开始飞电磁大战了，我。电。大混战。哦，但瓦斯科不是非致命，瓦斯科把人打死了。操！能不能把瓦斯科改成非致命呢？这货好烦人。我又不想的，我只是想用非致命，能不能真的是？沙丘缠结草。缠结草，结构，哎，这个是结构，但它不能种，别想，这个不能种。希望以后出个大的种植棚，来个农业大亨 DLC 是吧？标准螺旋，来个牧场大亨、农业大亨，做的像模拟人生一样的 DLC， 我恨不得呢。说实话，你要真能出那么多 DLC， 我就买这么多 DLC。咱们一言为定，好吧？你多出，然后你出的越多，我买的就越多，你自己看着办吧。其实我觉得星空是这个年头3A 游戏里啊少有的让人玩着放松的游戏。 你想想，我左想右想，发现近几年里没有哪一款所谓的3A 游戏玩起来放松，好像真是这么回事。它是异类。就你看我现在干的事，我就特别的，对吧？悠哉，然后自由自在，轻轻松松，舒舒服服的漫游。不需要为什么事情而感到紧张之类的，就很放松啊，整个游戏玩着。我觉得其中一点就怎么说呢？得益于它的主线没有大反派，没有世界里永远有一个什么大反派要毁灭世界，然后我在这，对吧？我每次悠哉，我就想，哎。那个大反派要毁灭世界，我还在这里悠哉，是不是不太合适？就没有这种想法。我爱悠哉，我爱悠哉多久我就悠哉多久，没有人在后面逼着我，非要给我说哦那边世界要完蛋了，快去拯救他们要完。可能阵营任务有，但是整个主线就最重要的这条线没有，所以我就能很舒服。我可以完全按照自己的一切的节奏去慢慢的。自己把控这个游戏，我怎么玩，然后我玩它的时候，我的心境是怎么样，可以不受干扰，心无旁贷的放松。我也没有仇要负，对吧？我也没有那个大 boss 要打。我和这个皈依也没仇，也没怨，他们也不要毁灭世界。所以我就很舒服啊！这年头在3A 游戏里，主线没有这种冲突的游戏凤毛麟角吧？他敢这么干，其实就挺厉害的，我觉得，就是完全和主流对着来，和他自己都对着来。你说辐射4有学院，对吧？你还是找儿子，这都不用说。星空这次是真的，我觉得是属于是3A 游戏里的一种 refreshing 的东西，一种让人耳目一新的感觉。哎呦，就这个氛围好像没有在这种1线游戏里再怎么体验过。独立游戏里有不少，当然。不是4不有著名的那个吗？就是儿子不找捡垃圾，老滚是奥杜因不管，在那不知道爱干嘛干嘛。平时我们拿这个当调侃，但是实际上你玩的时候心里还是会有一点，就总会觉得，哎，那个我是不是辜负了？我就感觉你作为英雄嘛，作为主角，你是不是辜负了人们对你的期望？就反正我有朋友可能心里不在乎，但我是属于那种在乎的人，所以我心里特别的纠结，就我到底做不做主线？我不想做主线，因为有很多别的内容我想探索。我做主线，但我不做主线，我又感觉我辜负了世界对我的期望。那我特别纠结，每次。星空让我放下了这个纠结，彻底的拥抱自己的节奏。哎呦！2人转啊，他反过来给人家一下。电子斗区确实比较有意思，但是前提是我能不能把他们劝开的。我的录制怎么被他关了？哎，别打了，不要打了，你们！哈，他这个鼠标 ，what the fuck？有的时候我切到 Game Bar 上，它会把游戏里的给我认成鼠标，然后不让我用摇杆控制视角。不要打了，你们不要打了，不要打了，我让你不。fuck， 这是他们的事儿，不关我事，我把它电麻了就行。你不能说因为草原上一头羊要被一个狼吃了就把狼弄死了，这是生态平衡，我们不应该干涉。 所以我并不会因为他把这东西啃死，把他给打死。我只是想努力的劝个架而已，虽然没能成功。对，我不就是想去，但是他趁那个空隙直接把人弄死了，是这样，我还没来得及说服另一只呢，这多尴尬呀！就好像那样，就两个人在打架，你过去不要打了，然后一个人说好不打了，然后另一个人看这个空隙给人一拳，操！这该死，太缺德，不讲武德，这就是典型的不讲武德，好吧？芳田烟熏草。芳田烟熏草是不是能做卷烟？我总感觉听着名字有一点烟草吗？能做烟草吗？难道它的产物是蜜蜂系呀？这个是沙漠独有的植物，在这颗星球上。什么跟着 NPC 走着走着？我忘了，说实话，那都这个想不起来。反正有不少任务是你第一次去圣旨那地方没，比如说火星那个就是那个我的北极星那个就很难触发，你要等到那个 NPC 特意走到那个雕像后面的时候才会触发那个任务。它有些触发条件非常隐藏的任务。我的北极星、塞多尼亚、火星人脸雕像后面的那个女孩还是男孩？哇，女孩应该是。他要在那个雕像后面看着远方的景色的时候，你上去和他说话才会触发他的任务。所以呢，你可以去看看。那任务藏的可太深了。霓虹城给我塞一堆支线我都没做呢，这警队。啊，德良，你不要挡着我扫描东西，我操！这个允许少战生成，差点写错。什么时候这个图鉴做完，我们就能直接用它总结那个数据图表？比如说，这游戏里植物和动物分别占比是多少？哪个星球占比多少？哪个星球上占比最多？哪一种的那个，反正就是可以做各种数据分析。等到这个图鉴齐了以后，哇，远处那座山是渐变颜色的，你看，我操，哇，哇，好美啊，这。我靠！橙色的星球，从山体到天空都是这种渐变。天空是从褐色到橙色到白色，而山体地面是从白色往下，它们两个是反过来的，造就了这个非常漂亮的景色。这层层叠叠的渐变沙丘，哇！ 这是什么？刺灵仙人掌。
I shall stand guard while you focus.
又有一只珊瑚蟹，这次能把它扫下来。我打开控制台是为了这样暂停游戏，防止他们乱动，否则我很难记录。啊，对对对，也防止队友在那里天天烦人。而且我现在有4个队友，更别提，能挡死我。珊瑚蟹能做卡尼亚 k 吗？我能拿它做卡尼包子吗？好不好吃呢？这只大卡尼肯定很好吃吧？狩猎、警觉、刺激剂，刺激剂是什么呀？所以，等等，我们没有记过刺激剂，这是第一个记录在案的生产刺激剂的东西。冰封沙山。能力，它有能力，远程嘴部攻击剧毒。靠，有毒啊！能吃吗？这？我要记，就是那个沙荣子那句话。这东西首先看一个东西，这东西能吃吗？不能吃，不能吃有什么用啊？不能吃，你记它干嘛？波江3，不知道为什么他不按照字母来排，找个东西累死我，很奇怪。接下来要拍一张照片，这里不合适，这里有别的东西，我要找下一只蜘蛛蟹来拍。那个游戏设计课要写游戏鉴赏。我决定呢，很容易 ，I critique。我决定这样，就是我把那个我给 Prey 写的那个不是写过吗？把它翻译成英文改改就行了，不是吗 ？Prey 的那一篇，这多么方便啊！不是，先用谷歌翻译成英文，再用 ChatGPT。润色一遍，再用 ChatGPT 翻译成中文，再翻译回英文，它就会变得完全不一样。从语序到结构，相信我。因为让它变得和以前不一样啊，你不能直接用以前的那个写的东西嘛，都是。那也一样嘛，就。但是现在都允许用 ChatGPT， 所以我这是合理合法的，对吧？主要天际游戏太大了，我相对来说要找一个小一点的，容易。星空的我没写完，他要一篇里面找2个游戏，他们的品类要是不一样。所以我打算找掠食和模拟人生。虽然你可以 argue 掠食是 RPG， 模拟人生是 RPG， 但我觉得他不是那个意思。他意思就是说别找2个太像。你们往前走啊，拜托！我想拍一个他们在走的照片。好，为什么这帮人我每次停下来的时候他们都是停着的？你们是在搞笑吗？ 总算有走的了，靠！哼，为什么这张照片有一种感觉，就是后面那人在喊等等等等队长等等？一个小队嘛，4个，我4人小队加机器人了，机器人不算人的，当然。你可以把对比度拉到最高，然后拍一个黑白滤镜，你就可以拍出这种照片，很艺术。我操，这照片剪影，黑白剪影。主角为什么闭着眼睛？能不能把眼睛给我张开？我操，我真服了你！他妈的！对了，他下个版本说还要修那个没有飞船没有敌人的问题，好像我看了，这应该也要修。这是哪儿？啊，没发现过的地方，我操！还有我们的代码呢上面，所以数字代码。被遗弃的中继站3。这前面还有这个被掩埋的那个降落平台呢。
Any interesting results?
找对，注意你的四周。但它本来就原生支持超宽屏模式，所以我也不知道什么意思。我这个超宽屏它就是原生支持，我不知道是指 HUD 修复还是还是32:9，也不一定，也可能是32:9，不好说。但21:9是支持的。捡垃圾，捡垃圾，我就喜欢。I'm loving it， 捡垃圾。Emil 他自己家显示器就是超宽屏，他怎么可能没发现？我当时星空一开始出来的时候，那个有一次时机里面，它两边有黑边，我就在想，怎么可能？这游戏怎么会这样？你这个总监自己家里显示器都是超宽屏啊，结果确实支持，不可能不支持。你敢信你是游戏总监，然后你的
Hey, you out here scavenging too? There's plenty here for both of us. If you say so. Well, like I said, there's plenty here for both of us if you were planning on exploring.
但是主机
I'm with the scavenger crew.
电视也没有
They took off
21:9。
to check another site. They shouldn't be too
拾
much
荒者
longer.
船队。
It has been a while though. Hope nothing's wrong.
哦，这我没有遇到过这个随机事件。
I told him I'd be fine. I like to work alone.
就他的船队说会来接他，但是他没回，没遇到过这个。
Nah, they wouldn't do that. Most of them are family. Thanks, but I'm good. I'm sure they're just busy loading up the ship. Here, take this. I doubt we'll have room for it anyway. Well, I'm pretty much done checking the place out. It's all yours.
他也，我还以为他会让我用飞船载他去一个地方，结果他也没让我载。懂事啊，这人不给别人添麻烦，但你可别逞强，否则到时候出事儿了。
Take a little too much on. Literally.
晚上，这个灯会发出那种声音，星空这些音效做的确实细。他去哪了？所以，他去另一个地方翻了吗？这个人。 他要去哪？我想知道。我就跟着他，经典。我就是有的时候就会突然犯这个病，我就要跟着他。我在各种游戏里都会突然犯这个病。我要看看他要去哪。等等，这个地方还没记呢，靠，就差点就跑。 让我拍一张，哎，这上面还有个平台的。19，零重力线，手电筒没有改过，这是原版的手电筒。我操，他往。 哎，他到那里去，还以为他被怪物吃了呢，吓死我！他在这里等着了，看来是。所以你的船呢？
Yes, hello.
你不是你真别，我觉得我帮他这附近的生物我要杀了，我怕他们伤害到他，人命关天，毕竟。
Once again, we are triumphant.
杀这几个也无所谓，反正。
Is that for selling later or personal use?
太神奇！这怎么这都死了都？我找个活的拍照。是。靠近点。靠近点应该就是敌对的。还，其实星空里，我感觉人类 NPC 没有多少严格意义上的敌对，就是他们基本不会主动攻击你的，包括野外的海盗和佣兵，只有你无视他们的警告，还要往里面闯，或者你先开枪，要么他们警告你继续走，要么你先开枪，他们才会打你。我没有见过二话不说上来就干你的，就是如果你是慢慢接近的话。 所以这些飞船也可能，你可以试试，你接近看看，可能就要敌对。他会先警告你，首先他也会警告你，飞船也会警告你，人也会警告你。
哎，他没警告我，他也没有打我。
那为什么呀？难道因为什么海盗身份不成？难道我去的时候没有海盗身份？我不知道。
那我没所谓的，反正这次我肯定要打，他不打我。
不过我去的时候他是警告过我的，也是说你不要再靠近了。这个叫海神级，那个叫海叉级。确定前面那个不是我写错了吗？看我也不知道，这还是真的名字不一样。这个生物它很没劲哎，它除了这个属性以外毛都没有，属于靠，没有什么可记。
必须跟个星战一样。
现在的人又哪去了？啊，人呢？哦，这儿，他在营地附近踱步。
打爆！看。
刺灵仙人掌，刺灵仙安德烈，我还是该开我的控制台还是开吧。仙人掌，化妆品，种核素为什么是一种核酸？碳基，自我克隆。波江座3，允许哨站生产。晚上拍照的话，你可以开着手电筒用第三人称看，这样子那个光线还是挺足的。因为第一人称你开照相模式会把手电筒给消失掉，第三人称没这问题。
第一人称那个队伍的位置，知道吗？
全都是亮楼。
Captain Stephen, may I take something? Good day, Captain.
还有一种资源没发现，令人震惊。等等，我操，你在干什么呀？地点没拍 ，fuck this 。
对，
这个只能这样。
哎，我新发射台就是不知道漏了什么东西没看，一直67%，可能差一个吧。
被遗弃的中继站3。这个叫眨眼中继站，暂时叫这个名字。3号。
队友，我出飞船的时候，队友直接把我挤了，脸都贴到那个舱门上面，因为带了不止一个队友，把我挤还没挤。
这个星球1.94中流可以小心点，别。哦呦，我操！啊！吓我一跳。看到卫星了呢，海边。为什么我找不到珊瑚蟹啊？全是亮龙，没有找到水。我现在一用这个能力，3个人在后面说话。
哎，瓦斯车不会出。你不挑个白天的时候来？
晚上。
拍照的拍照。
先让飞船降下来，我看这儿就不错。
哦。
Ship on its way。先看这儿，
我就在火星人脸这边等着。
这个这个地方是够大的，我操，太大了。他们这是要开火了，那就别怪我们不客气了。这个地方拍过照片吗？
么地方？
被遗弃的殖民地大战军营。
没有。
你怎么这么快就知道？
因为我没有
还
印象。
居然没有记过这个地方，我惊了，我操！
因为我根本就没来过这地方。
这没来，我来过几次，感觉。这个地方，那么殖民地大战军营，这个是随机地点。如果你以后碰到了探索的时候，可以把杂志加进去。我已经忘了是哪个杂志了，而且我要继续上路。
有时候只会在杂项那里。
说实话，杂志的东西肯定已经有攻略做出来了，我们也不用太在意。退下，退下，最后一次机会。好的，小子挺乖，听了。我们不是来围剿你们，只是建议你们不要瞎开火，下次注意一点。虽然我知道他们下次还敢，我只是和你们稍微意思一下而已。啊，这个是个问题，他这个船不从外面开门，这样他这个帽的里面是沉浸了，外面不开门了。
那你怎么出来？
进去，快速传送到飞船。
那你怎么出？哦，因为他刚这样。
人家怎么出来？我出来你也可以传送出来。
问你怎么？
那个按 X。
我说 ，Look at you。我是说你不开门你怎么出来？
因为他是直接给你传出来的 X。对，你用 X 就是，然后它起飞它也会关了。我在星空里睡眠严重不足，算了，每天睡不到4个小时，在这游戏里，目前我那个数据，所以要多睡睡了。我觉得能多睡点就多睡点，哈，把这觉补回来，起码要补到每天7个小时，最起码要补到狂睡。我操，睡回来了，再睡。这 bug 什么时候修啊呢
？My days, I will be thinking about you.
哎，这照片挺好看的，哈哈，很有感觉，是吧？
什么意思？哦，那个。
You need something, dearest? I know that tone. Very well. What is it?
我觉得这有的画好油啊！你看这个画，我的天，我觉得这个倒还，有的画有点太麻了。
You are not so bad yourself.
一些。
再睡个回笼觉，我看还能睡。 这枕头。
Last night, well, all that physical training seems to have paid off.
状态怎么样啊，莎
What's
拉
new with you today?
？Status report。
If you want help, I'm here.
Yeah, take a look at this.
Don't stay away too
Barrett。Status report。
Dusty. Dusty.
我让你 status report， 不要再问那给我 dusty
Right.
dusty
Almost
dusty
forgot
的。
about it. This is for you.
哎，他给了我肉酱意面，好，那没事儿，我吃，我就喜欢这个。肉酱意面就像我每天现实里的早餐一模一样。来，肉酱意面，肉酱意面，肉酱意面，肉酱意面，来一碗肉酱意面，加上一个咖啡。我咖啡呢？嗯。 哎，我咖啡啊，这里有，吓死我，以为差点以为没有咖啡了，你震怒了呀！我每天早上就吃肉酱意面。
没有。
你快点走，你要走，你在前面。哎，我靠这，我。
If you have any orders, I'm ready to receive. Marching orders, food orders, tall orders. Just let me get my sword.
Let's put this bird into space.
There. Stable over it.
冰封沙丘。
Landing gear is ready. Sight is clear.
Where are we going? What are we doing? What's next for me and you?
这个道和他们有 bug， 他们一直会挡着你，你知道吗？这队友，他们永远会挡着你啊！他这个设计的只能一个。
Hey, now the party
其
can
实还
get
更主要的
started.
是因为你这个可能就是两个东西叠在一起，
啊，
所以它能走的路就更小。
Well, I hope the next time around.
Hey, that it for now? Hey, be careful not to point that thing at me.
你这个风洞。这边的有没 有没有珊瑚蟹呀？问题在。灯景兽，大乱斗。我靠，打起来了！哇，上面有3个卫星啊！我靠。追逐戏，珊瑚蟹，紫色的。啊，这边不是最好的看。哇，哎，这个图，这个图的寓意解读一下，解读一下我想表达什么。
这种你这拍的感觉，
要
感觉队友全死了，就剩你一个人一样的。
我想表达的是，我的背后站着4个队友支持我的那种感觉。
我
感好，天哪！
真感觉是。看的真的像，像什么队友的灵魂还在背后默默支持那种感觉。
是队友，不是队友的灵魂。
一个人你自己。这，毕竟你拍不到实体，只能拍到影。 背后领。
深井寿是吧？就你叫深井寿。你们上，你们上，马斯克，上！操，怎么还他妈冲着我来啊！
贼先请，
解决了，被打晕了。
If you find anything significant, say the word.
Then 绰号提亚兹，哈，这个自动联想的第5个，
怎么又
啊，
来？
自动联想是这样，我靠，太离谱了！
我记得我好像记录了一个，
谁到时候打错了，直接把这打上去了，就搞笑。到时候独立盟的人一看，这是哪个星系啊？这啊？
我也可以。再站一题，站一题。
汉语氨基酸 ，amino acid。是谁以前都没有给这些无填上去？肯定是你。这些无都没有填，为什么呢？为什么这火玫瑰的那个基因是空着的呀？哈哈。
这
工作不认真啊，扣工资了准备啊，没有工资算了。
哪个是空的？
龟。
可能没降落吧。
不是，火玫瑰的基因是空的，它是个植物，但是别的却填了。
基因？
让我看看是谁写的。
哦，可能我没扫齐。
看看是谁写的，我就知道了啊。
按理来说应该
一目了然，准备有没有？看看是谁。
玫瑰？
一定是你。
我怎么不记得有这个？
到哪去了？
在哪？
火玫瑰在哪里？我怎么不见了？
把那一列拉到前面呗。
这儿。啊？怎么是我建的？我去，不是，怎么回事？我怎么可能？我别的全填了，就这一个没填，我也太离谱了。啊？
扣工资？
靠，找了半天是自己填，哎呦，我真是，shit，
笑。
哇！刚才填的是哪个来着？深井寿到这里。
算了，我也没支线做。
快速攻击。
我也去探星系。
失衡攻击。我们现在没有记录过失衡攻击，这是第一个。
没有吗？
波江座3。
搜寻对症。
这叫赛博什么呢？玩这现在这个星球探索养生，哎，我就挺养生的，我看。
对。哎，那个任务好像已经掉了。
不读你，怎么可能？北风草根，
这植物还挺贱的，虽然不是同物名。
Delete。弗雷亚3。波江座3。大部分适宜宜居的行星不是2就是3，因为是宜居带。发现这一点。代谢。
我的手表，这个我手表去。你不也打了这个手表？
那是要制造吧？
手表在哪？看。
终有一天，这个图鉴会完成的。到那一天，
手表已经给你自动带出来了。
洞方子。
嗯？
动静。
可以改网，有 WoW 的可以改。
有的一堆海盗。 啊？这有一堆骷髅，然后旁边有个远大前程，这是远大前程吗？所以。我操！太空劫匪在这里攻击深井兽。
I also wish to be prepared
这
for
个帽子可以给那个瓦斯特改武器，看能不能改个黑之命。
any situation, but I was just thinking. I am always willing. You will think of me. I hope.
自己打去了。这就是风动芳草。看待星球的过程最合适的就是你找个什么太空探索纪录片。 一边放，然后一边扫扫季节，我操，太他妈享受了！你可以想象你戴着耳机像星爵那样，但你听的不是音乐，而是这种太空探索播客，然后行走在星球表面去收集数据。
确实也应该搞音乐播放，
不能光是音乐，我想听播客，那种什么 NASA podcast 之类的来一点。哎。 NASA 是不是真有 podcast？ 让我看。NASA podcast。有哎 ，Explore our home planet and the universe with NASA podcast. Space station crew member discusses life in space on a NASA podcast. Houston, we have a podcast. From Earth orbit to the Moon and Mars. Explore the world of human spaceflight with NASA each week on the official podcast of the Johnson Space Center in Houston. NASA's Curious Universe, on a mission, small step, giant leaps. The journey to the stars doesn't just begin at the launch pad. Discover new worlds through epic stories told by scientists on missions to outer space.
Houston
podcast. Our universe is a wild and wonderful place. Join NASA astronauts, scientists, and engineers on a new adventure each episode. All you need is your curiosity from first time space explorers. Welcome.
第一个是捏他那个 Houston we have a problem。
我操，都第4季了，都12页的播客呀，这。看看这个 ，Listen now。
5, 4, 3, 2, 0. Liftoff of the Atlas V. launching the first interplanetary mission from the West Coast. And NASA's InSight, the first outer space robotic explorer to study the
应该
interior
跑
of
到
Mars.
NASA 遗迹上去听，坐在那儿，是吧？啊，坐呢，就坐建个椅子在旁边，坐在那长椅上看着那个废墟听这个。
riskiest 6.5 minutes of the mission. It's certainly exciting. It's a little frightening. We want to make sure that we're successful.
不知道为什么
We do
每
everything we
次就
can to make sure
从
we're
游戏
always
内
keeping
切
our fingers
切到，
crossed.
比如说切到这个浏览器的时候，那个 HDR 就一直在那里头闪。
The spacecraft is set to turn off at a certain time, so we got messages down saying, "Yeah, I'm leaking. I'm leaking. I've got to go now. I'll talk to you in 8 hours." So it's like, oh man.
When things go beautifully, it looks easy, but it's really not easy. You know, any kind of exploration is just not easy or guaranteed ever.
8 stories, 1 mission to outer space. On a Mission, a new podcast from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, launches October 29th.
之前是夜间版本这个数据库，我感觉
它不会自动连播，这行。
就1分钟。
The Danger of Going to Mars 第1集，去火星的危险。
Come with me on a mission to outer space. Our destination is the planet Mars. We have to travel over 300 million miles. That may seem like a long trip, but we'll be speeding through space at 13,000 miles an hour.
把音乐调低一点。50。
Start. 2, 1. Boost ignition. We are receiving heartbeat from 0.7 meters a second. We've acquired the ground with the radar. We are wheels down on Mars. Oh my God.
This is amazing.
Welcome to On a Mission, a podcast of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. I'm Leslie Mullen. I'm a science journalist, and I arrived at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, also known as JPL, 2 years ago. The lab is a jumble of buildings at the foot of the San Gabriel Mountains and just down the road from Hollywood. But at JPL, they're focused on stars of a different sort. JPL is like a little town, but a town full of scientists and engineers who study the mysteries of the universe and build robots to send to outer space. In my short time here, I've discovered there are a million stories to tell. The concept of this podcast is to take a close look at a single space mission and examine it from different angles. To share the science, yes, but also the struggle and satisfaction in getting a mission off the ground. For this first season, the focus will be on the InSight mission to Mars.
Go Atlas. Go Centaur. Go InSight.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3,
我要是能在玩星空时把 NASA 所有播客听完了，那也是狠。
但是你这1分半你就得快一点。
NASA's InSight, the first outer space robotic explorer to study the interior of Mars.
A rocket carrying the InSight mission launched from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California earlier this year, on May 5th. It is now on its way to Mars, due to arrive at the end of November. After it lands, the robotic suite of instruments will peek below the planet's surface, investigating the different layers that make up Mars. You may already know that Mars is the 4th planet from the Sun. Earth is the 3rd planet from the Sun, so Mars is a little farther out than we are. On a clear night, when you can see the stars, you may have noticed one that looks a little reddish. Sunlight bouncing off the Martian red rocks makes it look just like another star. But Mars is a world, a harsh, desert, alien world. Over the years, NASA has sent many spacecraft to Mars, but it's still a mysterious place in many ways and one that we've only just begun to explore. But Mars does not welcome visitors with open arms. Many spacecraft have died trying to get there. So far, there have been 43 robotic missions sent to Mars, Many from the U.S., but Europe and Russia and even India and China have
43个机器人任务到火
for
星
Mars missions is 18 successes and
，18次成功，25次失败。那失败还是比成功
Granted,
少
some of
啊
those
多哎。
failures can't be blamed on Mars. Some missions, especially early on, came to an abrupt end due to rockets blowing up on the launch pad or not getting very far past Earth. But still, less than half of the missions ever sent to Mars have made it.
没有
The
一半
InSight
成
mission
功。
hopes to improve the odds. Soon after InSight launched from Earth, on Mars, one of the biggest dust storms in history swirled into life.
Dust storms tend to pop up on Mars on a pretty regular
Project Bomb.
basis. In fact, there's a dust storm season on Mars. In some seasons, there's small dust storms. In some seasons, there are huge dust storms. And we actually just got hit with one of the big ones.
That's Bruce Banner, the scientist leading the InSight mission. He and the InSight team were first alerted to the storm from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, a satellite circling Mars. A rover on the ground named Opportunity sent photos back to Earth of the Martian sky growing dusty and dark until the sun disappeared in the sky. The storm grew until it covered most of Mars. We don't have weather like this on Earth. Our storms are located in one place, and then they drift to another area or disperse entirely. We've never, for instance, had a hurricane in the Atlantic Ocean grow and grow until it becomes a single storm, enveloping most of the planet. But this is not the first time we've seen such a large storm on Mars. When NASA's Mariner 9 orbiter reached Mars in 1971, it saw a global dust storm that was so immense, only the tops of the tallest volcanoes could be seen peeking
火星有
above the
全
haze.
球性
The
沙
Mars
尘暴，
Global Surveyor satellite witnessed a similar massive storm in
全
2001.
球性沙尘暴，巨
Those
型。
orbiters saw the storms from high above. The Viking 1 lander in 1977 was the first time we got to see such a big dust storm from the ground. Because Viking was actually in the storm, it also could gauge the force of the winds, which topped 60 miles per hour. Some of you may be thinking of the movie The Martian, which saw Matt Damon's character knocked down by a raging dust storm on Mars.
1,200 kilometers in diameter, bearing 24.41 degrees.
That's tracking right towards us.
Based on current escalation, estimated force of 8,600 newtons.
What's the abort force?
7,500. Anything more than that, and the map could tip.
Begin abort procedure.
Let's wait it out.
Prep emergency departure. We're scrubbed. That's an order. Visibility is almost zero. Anyone gets lost, hone into my suit's telemetry. You ready?
Ready! Commander, are you okay?
I'm okay!
It makes for good drama, but the air is so thin on Mars, only 1% as dense as air on Earth, that even the strongest winds wouldn't knock you down. In the movie, the roaring winds that rocked their spacecraft
哦，火星上其实风不会那么大。
would actually feel like a gentle
火星上的
breeze.
因为空气密度，他好像是说，就是火星救援里那种巨型的把那个什么火箭都吹飞的风是不会那样，只会有很轻的风。
Feel strong. Imagine you're at the beach. A wave comes up and knocks you down. The wave is moving slowly compared to the air, but because the water is so much more dense than the air, it doesn't take much to lift you off your feet. The opposite is what happens with the thin air of Mars. Although the winds there don't have the punch, they are able to pick up fine dust particles and loft them high into the air.
Mars dust is extremely fine, and it's very easy to lift up in the atmosphere. And without any moisture to have the dust particles clump together, it takes a long time for it to settle out. So these dust storms tend to kick up really fast and then die off really slowly. And even after the wind's all gone, you still have a lot of dust up there, which is absorbing the sun and making it kind of dark down on the surface.
InSight has to enter the atmosphere of Mars, descend down through it, and land on the planet's surface. This is known as EDL, entry, descent, and landing. On Mars, the atmosphere is thick enough to burn you up on entry, but thin enough to make landing with a parachute extremely tricky. This is why Mars landings often include rockets firing toward the ground, so-called
retro 是这个意思，是就是反推的，就是反向，发射方式真复古，retro firing， 发射方式真复古。
They do act as a little bit of a sandblaster. And when we designed their spacecraft, we knew that we were coming in during dust season, so we actually added about a ½ an inch of extra material on the heat shield, the ablative material that actually burns off as you go into the atmosphere. The calculations and the experiments that we actually did on the material indicated that that was more than enough to accommodate the extra erosion that we would experience if there was dust in the atmosphere. So even if there is still dust in the atmosphere when we land, our entry system should be perfectly happy with that kind of environment, and the parachute won't even notice it.
It can take months for dust from such a big storm to slowly settle out of the air. If there's a lot of dust in the air when InSight lands, the biggest problem for the lander will be power generation. InSight runs on solar power. Falling dust not only blocks the sunlight, it also could coat the solar panels, causing InSight to run out of energy. Opportunity rover, who got caught in the dust storm, is also solar powered. It went into hibernation soon after the dust storm appeared in order to save power. The power does more than run the rover. It keeps it warm on frigid Martian nights. Temperatures in Opportunity's neighborhood, the Martian equator, can dip down to -130 degrees Fahrenheit or -90 Celsius. Without a heater, the rover could freeze to death. It's similar to running a car in the winter so the cold doesn't sap the battery charge. The Martian cold may have been what ultimately killed Opportunity's twin rover, Spirit, back in 2010. Opportunity is currently the longest-running mission on the surface of Mars. It's been in operation for over 14 years, since 2004, and it survived a large dust storm in 2007. That storm led to 2 weeks of minimal operations, including several days with no contact from the rover, in order to save power. Opportunity has been in hibernation now since June 10th. Dust storms do heat the air up on Mars, so it's possible Opportunity wasn't fatally damaged by the cold. In September, enough dust had settled out of the atmosphere that sunlight could penetrate through the haze and recharge the solar panels. While waiting for the rover to wake up, to boost the team's morale,
波江座3
engineers
勘探完
started
毕。
each day playing a song in mission control. Wake Me Up Before You Go Go by Wham is just one of many songs dedicated to the sleeping rover. Over the weeks, their themed playlist has included I Will Survive by Gloria Gaynor, I Won't Back Down by Tom Petty, Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles, and Dust in the Wind by Kansas. Opportunity, meanwhile, remains silent and still. Mission engineers will keep listening for the rover to phone home over the next few months. What InSight will have to struggle with when it arrives on Mars is still to be determined.
We have a lot more solar power generation capability than Opportunity, but I think that our design would be at best marginal against the darkest part of the dust storm. Once we get to Mars, if we have a dust storm like that again, it would be pretty nerve-wracking for us.
Nothing lasts forever but the earth and sky.
InSight Science lead Bruce Bannert has had his heart broken by Mars
布鲁斯
before.
班纳
Years ago, he worked on the Mars Observer mission.
My early career, I sort of
Bruce
was a recluse.
Banner.
I'd kind of go in my office
这
and
不是
walk
这是不是
the
绿
door
巨人
and
的
just,
名
work
字
on my computer and hope nobody ever bothered me. But,
啊？
somebody
是个
came
叫
and
布鲁
said
斯
that
班
we
纳的
need
科学
someone to
家
work on
这
this space mission, or
好
we
好
need
狠
scientists to help integrate this altimeter that's going to go to Mars on Mars Observer.
An altimeter is used to create elevation maps that show the heights of mountains and the depths of canyons.
This was going to be the first detailed elevation map of any planet outside the Earth, and it's something that's really critical if you want to look at what forces there are on a planetary crust. And by the time we launched, I thought, well, finally, we're going to Mars and all our problems are behind us. And then we got close to Mars. We did our last sort of trajectory correction maneuver before going into Mars orbit, and we never heard from it again. Back in, what was that, 93, I guess, which is when this was all happening, we didn't have the fancy displays and the animation. So when we had to turn the spacecraft to do this orbit trajectory change maneuver, we slewed away from the Earth point on the radio, so we lost contact. It was supposed to fire its rockets for 40 seconds or something like that, and then turn her back around, and then we reacquired the signal. We had an old CRT monitor hooked up to the DSN data feed with the signal strength that just is a line across, sort of like one of those old oscilloscope displays. It turned away, and then so the line goes flat at 0 power. At 20 minutes or 40 minutes later, it's supposed to blip back up again and show our signal line. One of the young engineers on the project was like, keeping track of the time, had his pencil there on the screen, says, right about here's where we ought to get it. We were kind of watching, and it kept on going flat, and I said, well, maybe we're having a little bit of trouble acquiring, and so you're just waiting for something to happen, and it's not happening, and it's not happening. And at first there's lots of explanations why that might not be true, and then there's fewer explanations that are still consistent with being that wrong. And then maybe there's one or two things that might have gone wrong that are still not fatal. It's a slow motion train wreck that you're getting sort of more and more of a sinking feeling and trying to stay optimistic, but there's always a voice in the back of your mind
Stable
going,
orbit achieved.
oh, this isn't good.
Stay here forever.
We waited to acquire the signal, and it didn't show up. That flat line never did leave 0. That was a really, really horrible feeling to have worked on something for 5 or 6 years, and then suddenly, it's all gone. And later on, they found a design flaw in the propulsion system, which likely allowed the fuel to mix with the oxidizer in the wrong place and probably blow a hole in the side of the spacecraft. When Mars Observer was lost, we took sort of the same payload, or part of the same payload, and started a new mission with kind of the same designs but a little bit different spacecraft called Mars Global Surveyor, which launched about 4 years later. It kind of just merged from Mars Observer into Mars Global Surveyor. I ended up actually working on that project for about 20 years. And it's a great project. I mean, the MOLA maps of Mars, if you've ever seen a map that's kind of blue and orange, that's our MOLA elevation map that, I played a small part in helping to create. So these are like the first really high-resolution images that we had.
闭嘴，体感粉丝。
Started revealing, the actual geology of Mars at a level that kind of visualize as a human being and not as somebody flying, in an airplane, 2 miles up or something. And that's been one of the foundational data sets for Mars for understanding all kinds of things about that planet. That was an amazing project. That was so much fun.
As Bruce notes, although Mars Observer failed, the design was reused for the successful Mars Global Surveyor. Spacecraft are often made this way. InSight, for instance, is essentially using the same architecture as the Phoenix lander that made discoveries near the Martian North Pole over 10 years ago. The Phoenix lander, meanwhile, rose from the ashes of the Mars Polar lander that crashed in 1999. Rob Grover oversees the entry, descent, and landing procedures InSight needs to go through in order to land on Mars.
We can't really do full testing on Earth because the gravity is different, the atmosphere is different. We use simulation for making sure that we're successful on Mars. And we use a method called a Monte Carlo simulation, which it's named for a game of chance, which is a little bit of kind of like what.
我把这个船里面这个门的问题解决，到底怎么回事？
We actually land 8,000 times, and it provides us kind of statistics on how we'll perform. We randomize all the parameters that are used in modeling the landing, like the mass of the lander.
I
will never grow weary of seeing places like this.
The atmosphere we think we're going to land in, we run a Monte Carlo, and each flight path angle or angles we can hit the atmosphere. We also run a Monte Carlo too, so we have actually close to probably 1,000 parameters. And that allows us to practice the landing under multiple conditions. We do many Monte Carlos. A single landing we've run probably millions of times probably at this point over the 5 or so years that we've been doing this. There's a little bit of rolling the dice on EDL, but we try to account for everything we possibly can. It's a risky part of the mission, probably one of the riskiest 6.5 minutes of the mission. As EDL engineers, our job is really to try to think of every possible thing that can go wrong, everything that Mars can do, model that and make sure it's consistent. InSight is the first mission to land during the storm season, and that makes it particularly challenging because the atmosphere affects the landing quite a bit. And with dust storm season, we could be landing in the middle of a global dust storm, or the atmosphere could just be a regular clear atmosphere, or anywhere in between. And that makes a lot more variation that we have to account for when we're designing and executing the landing. So it makes it more challenging for InSight than past missions in that respect.
As InSight approaches Mars this November, we'll all be on the edge of our seats. watching for that signal, waiting to see if it beats the odds and survives. But InSight almost died before it even left Earth.
We had a lot of problems with InSight, and then we had to stand down from our launch in December of 2015, which was incredibly disappointing, and it was really a dark time. So it's almost Christmas, and then, you know, we had to give up, you know, suddenly on this mission.
More about that next time. If you like this podcast, please rate us on iTunes and SoundCloud, and share us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're #NASAOnAMission. Also check out NASA's other podcasts, Gravity Assist, Rocket Ranch, What's Up, NASA in Silicon Valley, and Houston, We Have a Podcast. They can all be found on NASA's podcast page or on most podcast platforms. We're On a Mission, a podcast of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
波江座3正式完成。接下来 ski 波江座3A。哎呦我去，飞船了！2个。Where?贫瘠。0.2，诶，这居然算温和。00。3，哦，这个也玩听， 这边降过是什么情况？那我就降这儿。
Beginning landing cycle.
Where are we going? What are we doing?
大家准备好了？极端太阳辐射00啊，好，真是00极端太阳辐射。咦？那飞船任务好像还是没修，但是不知道那飞船任务怎么办？就是那个飞船设计师，卸也卸不掉。
对呀，不是我已经
不知道为什么
我
这一卸就闪退，
我也不知道为什么你。
我还不敢动它，我只能期望它修好，否则我是没办法。
哇，他已经很久没。
这下惨。
这个是。
这下真惨。
居然没有马上去看任务。
因为太阳在我们头顶，我看那颗卫星，那是哪颗 ？B、C。
有黄的。
日记。
一个。实际是有人死。
我觉得有地面仔就会更好，但是它的星球多样性有点大，所以我也不知道怎么做才好。我感觉唯一能做的，首先我觉得悬浮这个东西不符合星空的世界观，所以也不会有。那怎么办？摩托？那队友也要有摩托，所以就很难办了。你像仙女座有车，所以仙女座的地图就整个是围绕着车设计的。 然后到定点，他会用特的那种小的给你堵死，不让你进去车。
那摩托也可以搞个2座的，队友也。
感觉只有摩托方案是现实的，别的那些都不太。
正常来说也就1个队友，所以做很。
做个全地形摩托，
有时候任务
这个可以。
有些时候任务可能还会再带多。对，那个机甲帽的还没放出来，我看到演示。
Achieving orbit now.
下一个 B。 B 已经勘察过了，但是我真的勘察，我首先我看，这边勘察过了不等于实际，应该是看看这个数据库就知道，应该是勘察过，看看数据全不全就知道，数据是全的 ，OK 了，这里，那就是 C 了。
Some days when I'm dreaming, I think of how far I have come. All my lives led to this, and now I see what I've become. I always had doubted that I could ever be someone that mattered, that shattered all these glass ceilings up above. All that I want is to see.
我虽然还有任务，但应该也差不多600多小时了，再他妈不做完太离谱。但我霓虹还有很多支线，我得靠。
可能剩几个。
但是我主线果然，我主线那个皈依会放在最后。等我做那个任务的那一刻，这游戏我就可以说首发版本我差不多玩完了。我会留到那个时候才会去做皈依的人，然后决定不皈依最后啊，这个样子。现在没有更新，
这听起来就像是没个好一样。找找皈依，然后直接要去。
Children of the sky, flying up so high.天，这船。
Hey there, glad to see you again.
喂，又来。我的这个模块我要给它改，这个模块这样挡人真的不行。这是个 mod 的模块，但它好像有问题，它会导致队友一直挡在那里。哎，虽然这个模块很好看，那我要想想别的办法。这样不行，每一次下船都要挤好久。低端太阳辐射。零下2度。氧气0，低端2氧化碳，而且没有水，那肯定是不宜居。这边的话是零下2。找到一个特征，哎呦，那个应该就是波江座3了，我们刚才在的星球。附近也没有地理位置的问题。来换个，哎，这边。我的 NASA 播客呢 ？Music of the Spheres.
Did you know that the Earth rings like a bell? When there's an earthquake, vibrations travel through rock, just as vibrations move through a bell to create a ringing sound. We know our planet rings like this because of seismometers, instruments that measure the vibrations of the Earth moving beneath our feet.
Cool to be safe for sure.
We don't hear the Earth ringing because these rock vibrations, called seismic waves, have a frequency spectrum below 1 hertz. The lowest frequency human ears typically can hear is 20 hertz. By speeding up seismic waves hundreds or even thousands of times, you can hear what an earthquake sounds like. This, for instance, is the altered sound of an earthquake in Japan. It's not just the Earth that rings when the ground is disturbed. The moon also rings.
Hey, I just threw something. It hadn't hit the ground yet. It must have gone up 300 feet. Stop playing. It gets worse.
Astronauts put seismometers on the moon during the Apollo missions in the 1960s and 70s.
Looks like it's going real good, Houston. This seismometer, I'm having a little trouble making the skirt lie down. But other than that, it looks good. Doesn't want to just lay flat like it does on Earth. At 1G, it sort of wants...
Rather than wait around for a moonquake or for a meteor to hit the moon, astronauts set off small explosives to create seismic waves.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire. Scientific gun. This thing has a pretty good kick to it. Okay, good shot, Ed. And like firing both barrels of a 12-gauge shotgun at once. Roger.
To create bigger vibrations, they needed a bigger bomb. On the Apollo 12 mission, after they'd left the surface of the moon and returned to the command module orbiting above, they sent their lunar module back down to the moon's surface. It hit the ground about 40 miles away from the Apollo 12 landing site with the force of 1 ton of TNT. As recorded by the seismometer, the shockwave lasted for an hour. Although the Apollo 13 mission is better known for "Houston, we have a problem," and the struggle to get the astronauts safely back home, when they circled the moon, they dropped their S-4B, one of the stages of their rocket, and it hit the moon 85 miles from Apollo 12's seismic instrument. The rocket booster hit with a force of 11.5 tons of TNT, and the shockwaves lasted nearly 3.5 hours.
By the way, Aquarius, we see the results now from 12 seismometer. Looks like your booster just hit the moon and it's rocking it a little bit. Over. Well, at least something worked on this flight. To say, I'm sure glad we didn't have a limb impact, too. All right. Start. 2, 1, booster ignition. We are receiving heartbeat codes. 0.7 meters a second. We've acquired the ground with the radar. We are wheels down on Mars. Oh my God.
This is amazing.
Welcome to On a Mission, a podcast of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. I'm Leslie Mullen, and this season we're taking a close look at the InSight mission to the planet Mars. One of the things the InSight mission will do is place a seismometer on Mars to feel for vibrations.
地震仪
InSight is actually an acronym. Here's Bruce Bannert, lead scientist on the mission.
It stands for Investigations of internal exploration of Mars using seismology. Now, I can't visualize the letters. SIGHT. To be honest, I figured out the acronym after I had the name. In the end, I came up with InSight because, we really are looking into the planet. We're trying to see into Mars with these geophysical instruments. InSight kept on going back, and I kept on trying to put together an acronym that would work. And I think it's like internal exploration using seismic investigations, geodesy, and heat transport. There you go. And the exploration just kind of keeps its lowercase e. We don't actually get that into the acronym.
Okay, sometimes you have to be creative to make an acronym work.
We almost call it Tremors. Tremors is a crazy set of monster movies that are set in California. My kids wanted me to call it Tremors because they think those movies are really funny.
Part of the InSight acronym is seismic investigations. We want to see if Mars has quakes, but there's more to it than that. Vibrations going through a planet or a moon are a way to see the different layers deep inside.
An earthquake is almost like a little flashbulb. It illuminates the inside of the planet with seismic waves, and the seismometer is like a camera that picks up those waves and helps put together a picture. Pixel by pixel, we get to put together a 3D picture of the inside of a planet.
That's also why astronauts put seismometers on the moon, to peek under the surface and see how the moon is constructed.
So seismology turns out to be the primo method for finding out what's inside a planet. 90% of what we know about the inside of the Earth is all mostly because of seismology.
The layers inside tell you about the history of a planet, says Sue Shmurkar, Deputy Principal Scientist of the InSight mission.
We know any rocky planet starts out molten, from little blobs of material floating around in this disk around our sun. Those planetesimals, those little bits of matter and rock, they come together and they crash, and that creates a lot of heat energy just from the impact of those planetesimals with each other. Then what? Then it forms these layers inside the planet. The heavy stuff sinks to the bottom and forms a core. The light stuff rises to the top and forms the initial crust. The layers that form in the inside, they have to be different because rocks of a given composition, they'll go through like a phase transition. If you take a rock from the surface and you put it down, a depth of 500 miles, that pressure and temperature can cause it to transform, like from graphite to diamond, right? It's kind of a classic example, but virtually all rocks will change their shape, their crystalline shape, when you apply pressure and temperature if you apply enough. So we'll get this very new picture of what happens after planets, after they're molten, and how these layers start to form. We'll know the size of the crust from seismology, know the size of the core, and we'll get a much clearer picture of what happened immediately after Mars formed. And from that, we can learn about not only that initial phase, but also how it's changed over time.
Unlike the Apollo missions, the InSight mission will not be blowing up explosives or crashing rockets down on the surface of Mars to create seismic waves. Here's Bruce Bannon.
I have something for you, Captain.
The idea of having, a controlled energy release
Struts,
is a
retract.
common method in seismology. Then you know exactly where your event is, your energy release, which is either wave, explosion, or impact, anything that bangs around. If you know exactly where it is, you know exactly what time it is, then you have extra information that you can use to measure the speed at which the waves have come from that point to your seismometer. And that speed is one of the key things that we're measuring in seismology and using to probe the material. The rocket that brought Apollo to the moon basically stayed with it until it got close to the moon, and so it was in the right place at the right time. The way that a planetary spacecraft works is that you give the big boost with the Centaur upper stage, and then you separate them, and then you do the sort of the fine-tuning for the next 6 months using smaller rockets on the much less massive interplanetary spacecraft, in this case InSight. In order to get that Centaur to actually hit Mars exactly where you want it, you would have to put a whole attitude control system on it. You'd have to do trajectory correction maneuvers. You'd basically have another spacecraft, which would be extremely expensive, and something that big would be very difficult to navigate all the way to Mars. What we did consider is actually sending smaller spacecraft containing basically cannonballs. If you just take a tungsten, which is something that doesn't erode very much from high-speed entry into an atmosphere, you can take a tungsten ball that's about 6 inches across, and if you target it right at the planet and have it impact at interplanetary speeds, which are about 10 kilometers per second, even a small ball, like I said, about 6 inches across, will make a crater that's about 15 or 20 feet across on the surface, and that creates a seismic signal that you can see many hundreds of kilometers away. One of the co-investigators on our team actually put together a proposal to NASA to do that, and NASA considered it and decided that I think it's going to be about another, $50 or $60 million. And they said, "Oh, you guys should be happy with what you got,
the InSight mission will rely on Mars quakes to set off their seismometer.
A Mars quake is caused by the same thing that causes earthquakes. It's caused by stresses, by forces that build up in the crust of the planet and finally, break the rocks like you pull a rubber band and once it breaks, it snaps. On Mars, we think that the forces are due to basically thermal activity inside the planet. Just the contraction of the planet itself as it gets older and older. As it cools, the planet gets smaller and the crust around the planet has to kind of crinkle a little bit to kind of fit on a smaller and smaller sphere as the planet thermally shrinks. Other things that can happen is if you have actually a particularly warm spot in the mantle, it can actually buoyantly push up on the crust, and that will bend the crust and cause stresses and cracks to form, and those cracks will be Mars quakes.
Meteorites also smash down on the Martian surface from time to time, creating big impact craters and shaking the ground.
We know that there are
我只是重置，不是 remake，remaster 就行。我懒得弄那些什么修复 mod、补丁 4GB， 哎呀之类的东西了。等到时候出 remaster 之类的。
The Apollo missions, even with the controlled explosions to set off the seismometers, scientists at first weren't sure what they were seeing when they looked at the data.
Apollo 11 had measured seismic activity for a few weeks. The seismologists saw the data, and it just looked like a bunch of kind of random noise. And then when they went back with, I believe Apollo 12 had a seismometer on it, and then they crashed the upper stage of the rocket, and they looked when that signal was supposed to come in, it looked like one of those noise things that they'd seen before. And when they looked at it more closely, they realized that this actually was a seismic signal, but it wasn't like a seismic signal that you see on the Earth. It was something that was kind of a gradual increase in the amplitude and then a long die-off because the moon transmits seismic waves differently than the Earth does. There was a lot of head scratching before they kind of figured out how that worked. But once they knew what a seismic event looked like on the moon, they could go back and say, oh, we've seen dozens of these before.
这有个小岛，
they're off and running on lunar seismology.
这边有一个更小的岛。
They say, oh, that's what a seismic
大家看，这里可以降落哎。
They were kind of hosed for a while. Now, on Mars, of course, we're not going to be able to do that. So we come pre-armed with the realization that a seismic wave might not look like what we expect it to, although there are lots of reasons to believe that the similarities between the Earth and Mars are much more important for seismology than the differences that we see between the Earth and Mars.
Let's set it down.
We're expecting things that look more Earth-like, but we also have the understanding that it's easy to fall into a trap of seeing something that you haven't seen before and just dismissing it.
Another way to think of this is, what will Mars sound like? After I learned about the Apollo mission seismometers, I mentioned to Bruce that the moon rings like a bell. He quickly corrected me. Earth rings like a bell, he said, but the moon rings more like a gong. There is a gong in the InSight strategy room, and he not only agreed to illustrate the concept for me, he took apart his own doorbell at home in order to bring in one of the chimes.
So there's lots of musical instruments based on kind of this
怎么
bell.
歪了？这本来是歪的吗？
A gong is a little bit different, a little bit scruffier sound, okay? And if you look at it real closely, you see there's lots of kind of dents in a gong. And those dents actually keep the sound waves from running free, okay? So when the sound waves hit these various dents, it sort of scatters them. It makes them, kind of bounce off and go in different directions. If you hit the gong, you can see it has kind of a little bit of an edge to it. Hear that tone, but you can also hear kind of a sizzle on top of it, and that's all the waves kind of getting scattered around. The moon has a characteristic, much like a gong, in that the top 50 kilometers, maybe 100 kilometers or so, is all broken up from all the impacting, and because it's so dry, there's almost no water at all in the moon's crust, those cracks never heal up again. On the Earth, you have water, you have heat, and it tends to make those cracks kind of heal over, millions of years, and basically becomes more like solid rock again. But on the moon, when a wave comes, it tends to bounce off the crack. It bounces here and bounces there and bounces back and back, and they start running into each other. The waves go on and on for a long time because the moon is very dry. They don't get damped out. It, quote, rings for a long time, but it doesn't ring like a bell. It rings more like a gong.
Like the moon, Mars is dry, but Mars has other aspects more in common with Earth.
We think it's going to ring more like the Earth because even though Mars is dry on the surface, it does have moisture. We have polar ice caps, which are largely CO2, but partially water as well. And so there's a water cycle. There's certainly evidence of water in Mars's history on the surface. Yeah, there's your Mars. There's your moon. And so we think that Mars is going to act more like the Earth, but it's a mystery until we actually go and measure it. That's one of the big questions.
Bruce told me that scientists have wanted to put a seismometer on Mars for a long time, and they sent one in the 1970s on the Viking landers.
Mars. It's waiting out there, just as it always has. Reluctant to give up its secrets, even to earlier spacecraft flying by its sometimes dust-shrouded surface.
Roger, we just switched to single subcarrier, pull 14 to 43. Mode, copy that.
Vikings to Mars. The stage is set, the spacecraft are well underway, and the people on the ground are nearly ready for this country's first Martian landing.
Bruce says the Viking seismometers didn't work as planned.
I was following, the Viking mission back when I was a graduate student, and it had a seismometer on it that we had high hopes for, but turned out to be just not quite sensitive enough. They weren't able to give it the resources to be able to put it on the ground on Mars, and so all it ever ended up measuring was the wind blowing the lander around, and we were all disappointed. But then they shut off the Apollo seismometers in '77, and Viking didn't send back useful seismic data, and so most of the terrestrial community kind of said, well, there's no data coming back, there's no science to be done, and they went off to do other interesting things that had to do with the Earth, and I kind of kept on working on these things and trying to press them forward, and so I became kind of identified as the planetary seismology guy, at least in the United States. Back in the late 1980s, there was a guy at the Microdevices Laboratory here at JPL who had a really sensitive accelerometer. It's something that measures, motion really sensitively, like at picometers, which is 10 to the minus 12 meters. And he thought, hey, this would make a great seismometer, and something that measures ground motion. And so he came to talk to me and says, hey, would you like to kind of work with this? And we can make a seismometer. It'll only weigh, 30 grams or 40 grams or something crazy small. And then you'd be able to put it on a rocket and send it anywhere in the solar system you want. I said, well, that sounds pretty cool. And so that kind of sent me down the path of trying to get these seismometers on a Mars mission.
Bruce has been trying to put a seismometer on Mars for over 30 years, but there's limited money for space missions, and there's a lot of places to explore.
The thing is, you're competing against probably 25 other really great proposals, and so trying to get your nose above the pack or ahead of the pack, it's really a tough problem when you have so many great things to do in the solar system.
Every time it seemed like he might finally get to send a seismometer to Mars, he was disappointed.
It was actually on NASA's official roadmap for planetary exploration to have this, what they call the Mars Network mission, which is going to send 16 landers to Mars, all with seismometers, and dot them all over the surface, and we're going to do this great seismic experiment. And then started looking at the bill for something like that. It's $1.5 billion to $2 billion. And this is back in the 90s when that was worth a lot more money than it is today. And so NASA got a little bit, let's put the brakes on this a little bit.
Scientists in other countries also want to send a seismometer to Mars. The Russians tried with their Mars 96 mission, but the rocket failed and it came crashing back down to Earth. Bruce later recruited the French seismometer team from that Russian mission to work with him. And then
I figured this is the last proposal I probably had time to make, because a proposal takes 2 or 3 years. Once they select you, it takes another 5 years, 6 years, and then your mission is another 2 or 3 years. And so you really have to have about 10 years in your pocket when you do one of these proposals if you want to do the whole thing before you retire. So we put in this proposal, and then NASA chews on it for about 8 or 10 months. I think we put in the proposal in January. In the summertime, NASA's saying, well, we're getting close. We'll be making our selection pretty soon. When are you going to be available so that if your mission's selected, we can involve you in the press conference and stuff like that? And so this is August. I'll be available any week except for this 1 week because I'm going camping and there's no internet, there's no availability. Of course, they picked that week to make their decision. I was actually up in the mountains when they made the announcement. This is the Sierra Nevada, it's just south of Yosemite, a little beautiful, beautiful area. And I was there with my whole family, and so we were driving down the mountain, and we finally got into phone contact, and suddenly the phone in my pocket as I'm driving down starts going, ding, 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 my email alert, and it's just like going on constantly. And I'm going, whoa, something's going on here. And of course, I'm thinking in the back of my mind, this could be, selection, but I don't want to really commit to that emotionally, right? So I'm going down the mountain and my phone is like digging away. I thought, well, maybe my iPhone is just on the fritz. Maybe I got in the water when I was playing in the river or something. I don't know. So we get down to the bottom of the mountain. We have a tradition in my family is we go to the In-N-Out in Clovis, right outside of Fresno when we get down from camping. I told my family to go ahead and go on inside. I'll see what's going on here. And I've got a couple of phone messages. So I thought, well, before I look at my email, I'll look at the phone messages. And there's one from a contact at NASA. And he says, oh, hey there, Bruce. If you get a moment sometime, you might give me a call. I got something to talk to you about. And that was the message, right? It's like, it was so non-committal. And then the second message was from my project manager that I was working for on the proposal. And I got his message. He says, hey, Bruce, we're in, give me a call, and I just started jumping up and down in the parking lot right there in the In-N-Out, and my kids came screaming out of the In-N-Out burger because, we kind of talked about what it might be, and so, yeah, it was kind of crazy, but a lot of fun. We raced down to Pasadena. They were already, they put together a party outside the Athenaeum, just on the spur of the moment. I kind of showed up, of course, all dirty and scraggly from a week of camping, and everybody else is like all dressed up in their summer finest, but nobody cared. That was August 20th, 2012. My birthday, actually. Great birthday present.
Bruce and his team set to work on building the lander and all the instruments. 3 years and a mountain of work later, InSight was on the launch pad, but then the seismometer showed signs of trouble.
We'd already overcome several other technical problems in making such a delicate and sensitive instrument, and so we were rushing to the end, trying to get the instrument all finished in time to put it on the lander and get it to the rocket.
我把它非致命了，瓦斯科就不会杀它。
Thermal vacuum testing, where we actually tested in the conditions that it's going to see at Mars. Suddenly we saw some kind of a leak letting the vacuum out of this container. We finally traced it to what we call the feed-throughs, the places where we actually feed the wires through the wall of this vacuum container so we can get signals out and power into these seismometers. The material around those wires had cracked a little bit when we went down to very cold temperatures. And we found out later that the connectors that we used here were actually not really designed to withstand the super cold temperatures on Mars. They were designed to stand maybe minus 30 degrees C, and we had to go down to minus 100, 120 degrees C. And so just the thermal expansion coefficient was such that causes a very, very tiny crack. And I mean, it was a really small leak. If you had that leak on your car tire, it would take about 50 years to lose 1 PSI out of your car tire. But these seismometers are so sensitive that was enough that by the time we got to Mars, we would have lost about a factor of 5 to 10 in our sensitivity, which would make our experiment pretty much useless on Mars. And so we'd actually already sent the lander to Vandenberg, and it was sitting there already checked out and ready to accept the seismometer. So the seismometer was just the last little cherry up on top of the sundae that we needed to get there. We tried to fix it, but we couldn't find a way to patch it that would also withstand those big temperature variations, going from warm to cold and back again, as you have to do on Mars every day. In the end, our last attempt to patch it, we did the testing and it failed. There just wasn't any more time. We had to stand down from our launch in December of 2015, which was incredibly disappointing, and it was really a dark time. It's almost Christmas, and then I had to give up suddenly on this mission. And then I went home and I moped for about 2 weeks and recharged my batteries and started back up after New Year's and told NASA we'd like to get a second chance to do this if we have a little bit of time. We know how to do the repair right. And they said, well, okay, well, take about 2 or 3 months, put together a detailed plan, and we'll consider the path forward.
InSight went back to the drawing board.
We went completely through the entire system. We redid those connectors, and we went through all the other systems on the spacecraft and the other instruments as well, made small improvements. It was really a horrible experience to delay, but I think, on some sense, we're better off for it. We have a stronger mission now than we did 2 years ago.
Last May, InSight finally launched from California's Vandenberg Air Force Base and headed for Mars. It launched in early morning darkness, with a thick fog blanketing the area. Those of us who came to watch the launch could see nothing, but we heard the rumble of the rocket blasting off. We felt the vibration of it in the ground.
这个地方好美啊！我想在这里建个哨站。
The perfect send-off for
这
a
地方好
mission
漂
going to
亮，
Mars
这
to
片针
detect
叶里。
vibrations, to feel the heartbeat of Mars, and to listen for its song. Next time on a mission.
We come in at night and we call ourselves little test bed gremlins just because no one sees us. Just stuff happens in the night and miraculously all the data's there in the morning. So
if you like this podcast, rate, like, and share us through your favorite podcast platform. We're hashtag NASA on a mission. Also check out NASA's other podcasts, Gravity Assist, Rocket Ranch, What's Up, NASA in Silicon Valley, and Houston We Have a Podcast. They can all be found on NASA's podcast page. We're on a Mission, a podcast of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
哎呀，听着这 NASA 的播客在星空里面这样子探索着星球，怎么这么舒服？这两个简直是太天作之合了。就每个让你坐起来都很平静，探索星球让你觉得很平静，然后这个播客整体听起来的感受让你也很平静，就哇。
October 28, 2003. The sun is stormy and agitated. It releases one of the most powerful solar flares ever recorded. The flare shoots towards Earth, damaging some satellites and causing others to fail. GPS and communications are disrupted. Astronauts on the International Space Station are told to take cover, and airlines are advised to fly at lower latitudes to avoid exposing crew and passengers to the intense radiation. The solar flare travels beyond Earth, killing the Marie instrument on the Odyssey satellite orbiting Mars. 2 rovers named Spirit and Opportunity were on their way towards Mars, scheduled to land soon. As they were engulfed by the solar flare, their star trackers failed, causing the spacecraft to lose attitude control. The spacecraft's computer, one engineer told me, was losing its mind. Flight engineers shut the computers down, fearing memory chips were damaged, not knowing if they could bring the mission back to life.
Start. 2, 1. Boost ignition. We are receiving heartbeat from time. 0.7 meters a second. We've acquired the ground with the radar. We are wheels down on Mars.
Oh my God. This is amazing.
We're on a Mission, a podcast of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I'm Leslie Mullen. The engineers got lucky that day. The computers came back on, and the rovers Spirit and Opportunity landed on Mars in January 2004, as planned. The story of the 2003 solar flare is just one example of the hair-raising challenges every mission to outer space faces. This season, I've been talking about the Mars InSight mission, which has had its share of overcoming obstacles and defying the odds. But it's not just the technology. The people who work on these missions have faced their own challenges and series of obstacles to get where they are today. Space missions, and the people who work on them, need to have grit. One person with this quality is Marlene Martinez-Sungard. She's in charge of the test bed for InSight. What is a test bed, you might ask?
we have a team in the test bed whose job it is to make sure that we are able to run all of the sequences that we will run on Mars here on Earth. It's kind of like practice.
3 instruments sitting on the InSight lander have to be placed on the ground on Mars. To do that, a robot arm will pick each instrument up.
So at the end of the robotic arm, there's a little grapple that looks like a finger claw in an arcade game, basically.
If you've ever tried to win a prize from the arcade claw game, you already know it's not as easy as it sounds.
Sector 12. Who's in charge here?
Claw's our master. Claw chooses who will go and who will stay.
The claw had a starring role in the movie Toy Story when Woody and Buzz Lightyear ended up in an arcade game filled with little green alien squeak toys.
Claw, it moves.
To what do I owe this pepper? Come back.
I have been chosen. Farewell, my friends. I go on to a better place.
The goal for the robot claw in InSight is to hook on the instruments and then gently place each one in front of the lander on the Martian surface. This has never been done before, so Marlene's team practices the delicate operation on Earth again and again, perfecting each maneuver. But unlike the arcade game, they need to pick up that prize on a planet millions of miles away, where the very ground you stand on may handicap your efforts.
There are scenarios where we set down on a tilt, on a 15-degree tilt, for example, and so we'll build a 15-degree workspace in front of the lander, and then we'll set the instrument down on that 15-degree workspace. And then also the instruments have tethers, they have power and telemetry tethers, so that we can get our data back from the instruments. And sometimes these tethers will overlap.
As the robot arm is moving the instruments, what if their tethers get tangled up? What else might go wrong? By practicing every possibility, Marlene's team works to avoid any mishaps. Because millions of miles away, on another planet, a mishap can mean the end of the mission.
We practice everything multiple times in multiple scenarios, so that's kind of what my job in the test bed is.
Marlene's story begins back here on Earth, in the state of Washington.
I was born and raised in a small town in eastern Washington called Warden, like a jail warden. My grandparents were migrant farm workers, my parents were migrant farm workers, and so they just moved around the country a lot and settled on Warden, Washington, which has a lot of potatoes. At one time, I remember hearing a statistic where our county alone grew more potatoes than the state of Idaho. I started working in those potatoes when I was 13 years old. We would work every summer, and so the rule in my parents' house was that if you were in school, you didn't have to work. If you ever left school, you had to work, because they were forced to drop out of middle school and high school when they were young so that they could work to help support their families. So when I was 13, 14, and 15, I worked in the fields. I would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, be out in the field by 5, which is sunrise, and then work till about 3 in the afternoon. When I turned 16, I was old enough to work in a potato warehouse, which oddly enough was, I think, worse than working in the fields. Because in the warehouse, I had to stand at this conveyor belt as potatoes were coming down the line. I would just stand there for 2 hours at a time straight with extremely loud machinery around me, just pulling weeds and rotten potatoes out of this like conveyor line. I did that for a couple weeks, and my father's godmother was our supervisor, and she would pull me off the line once a day to go do like a quality check on the boxes. And so I'd grab a box off the conveyor belt, and I would count how many potatoes were in it, and then I'd go back to the conveyor line. About 2 weeks in, I got moved to the weighing. There was like a spot where the potatoes, as they were getting boxed, would get weighed. They needed to weigh 50 pounds, and then they could get glued, closed, and shipped off. And so my dad's godmother moved me there, I think because she felt so bad for me. I was just like having a horrible time. And then one day, one of the boxes got stuck, and so I had to hit the emergency stop button on my part of the potato boxing. And so the mechanic came around, and he was running to the wrong spot. And so he said, no, it's over there. And so he kind of looked at me funny and then went to go fix the problem. He came back later, and he just said, you speak English? And I said, yeah, I was born and raised here in the United States. And he's like, okay, I need you to do inventory. So I was like, okay. And so then I got moved to inventory, and I spent the rest of the summer doing inventory in this extremely cold, refrigerated warehouse. But at least I wasn't standing sorting the potatoes. So I always consider that the fastest promotions I ever got.
If you go to the website cityofwarden.org, you'll see beautiful panoramic photographs of farmland. Warden's population is mostly Hispanic, and some families trace their heritage as far back as the early Spanish explorers. But for many in this community, including Marlene, life is divided between two countries. And that has presented unique challenges for her life.
I spent about 9 months of my childhood each year there in Warden, Washington. The other 3 months of my childhood I spent in a small town called Los Angeles in Mexico, in the state of Nuevo León. It's up north, kind of by the Texas border, and so we would go there every November and then come back to the States about end of January, early February. So when my parents would take us out of school for 3 months at a time, we had to prove that we were enrolled somewhere, and so we would enroll in school in Mexico. But the problem with that was that our parents wanted us to keep up with the schools in the United States. And there was a lot of us from town. Warden is a very large agricultural migrant community. And so every winter, half the school would leave. And so the teachers knew that you needed to prepare all of your lesson plans for the months of November through February ahead of time, because all the kids were going to be leaving and they needed to take all their homework with them. Moving back and forth was fun. 5 or 6 families from Warden went down to Mexico at the same time. And so we would make our Suburban into like this big bed, because we didn't have enough room for 3 months of luggage. And so what we would do is just loosely, we'd put all the clothes into the footwells of everything, and then we would cover it with a big blanket, and then we would make sure that we had all of our seatbelts were accessible, because we knew we still had to be wearing our seatbelts most of the time. And my dad installed this little AC/DC converted television. It's like the smallest little VCR, and we just watched movies the whole way down. All of our cousins had convertible vans, I think is what they were called. Everyone would just kind of like rotate from vehicle to vehicle, just depending on who was playing what movie, what day. You know, we'd stop for breakfast, and then someone would say, oh, we're gonna watch Casper, and so we would all go to that van. It took us 2.5 days to drive down straight. They'd drive through the night. Our parents would just keep rotating in and out. And then in Mexico, our town in Mexico, it's more like a ranch, just a bunch of houses kind of in one centralized place. There were so many small towns around it. The bus would come and pick up all the kids from the surrounding town and bus them to a town called Los Ramones. The bus would pick us up at 5 in the morning, and then we'd get to school at 8 in the morning. And because we're the first ones picked up because we were the farthest away. And then we would go to class until about noon. We would usually leave Los Ramones at about 12:30, 1 o'clock, and we'd get home about 3:30 in the afternoon. And then we would go to our rooms and get all of our American homework out, and we'd do a few chapters and we'd go out and play. It was a very interesting learning experience in that I learned how to teach myself a lot. Just going to school in Mexico was the other, I guess, hard part, in the sense that I understand Spanish pretty well. I understand conversational Spanish perfectly. I don't understand a lot of things about, cellular biology in Spanish. So when they're talking about meiosis and mitosis and cell splitting in Spanish, I had no idea what they were talking about. And so things like that, where I remember sitting in class and just writing everything down and then going home and asking my dad what it all meant. And that's how I just got through school in Mexico, is a lot of writing stuff down and translating once I got home.
So here's a girl trying to excel in school in both the U.S. and Mexico, working under the hot summer sun in the potato fields or in the loud and tedious potato warehouse. She also worked for a time cleaning hotel rooms. This is not the easiest life. And to add to the challenge, Marlene has Tourette syndrome.
Tourette syndrome is a neurological disorder that manifests itself in tics, motor tics and vocal tics. So, for example, the listeners can't see mine because most of my tics are all motor tics. So they're in my face, they're in my hands. I scrunch my nose, I blink my eye, I kind of rub my fingers together. When I was a freshman in high school, I used to repeat a lot of the words that I said. So it was iffy. I would repeat either the last word of the sentence I just said, or I would repeat the entire sentence, depending on how long it was. Tourette syndrome, motor tics can just vary a lot, but the vocal tics are usually in 3 categories. One is palilalia, which I had, which is the echoing of your own words. There's echolalia, which is the echoing of other people's words. And then there's coprolalia, which is the uttering of inappropriate words. So that's a lot of what the media picks up, the people who curse out loud. And so when I was growing up, I knew there was something different. I knew that I had these things that I couldn't control. And my mom was always telling me that I needed to stop, and I couldn't control, and I couldn't stop, and I didn't know why, and I just kind of figured it was just something that was wrong with me, and I just didn't know what it was. And so my senior year of high school, I was reading my sister's teen magazine, and Nev Campbell had written this essay about how she was trying to spread awareness because her brother had Tourette syndrome. She just goes on and she's describing all of his tics and all of the symptoms that he displayed, and it was, I remember just reading them, I was like, oh, I do that one. And I was like, oh yeah, and he blinked his eyes, I was like, oh, I do that one. And he cleared his throat, and I thought, I did that one too. And as she's naming all these different tics, I was like, I do all of these. And so I remember just having this epiphany. I was like, oh my God, I have Tourette syndrome. That's what it's called. And so I went downstairs and I was like, Mom, I have Tourette syndrome. And she was like, yeah, that's what the doctor said when you were little. I was like, what? Why didn't you tell me? And she just said, well, I didn't think you needed to know. I don't know if it would have made a difference had I known earlier, but once I knew what it was kind of like, okay, so it has a name. Other people have it. I'm not crazy. There's nothing too wrong with me. There's still something wrong with me, but at least it's something that other people have. When I was about 25 years old, I thought, I wonder if there's a camp for kids with Tourette syndrome. And so I just Googled Tourette camp, and I found this Tourette's camp that is held up in northern Illinois, just north of Chicago. It's called Tourette Camp USA. And so I went to their website and I saw that there was staff applications, and so I applied to volunteer as a staff member. And my first summer was 2009, and I went and I just met all of these people with Tourette syndrome. And up to this time, I hadn't met anyone else with Tourette syndrome. I just remember thinking, this is fantastic. Like, I love these people. Everyone has so many different tics. And like, I remember looking at these little kids walking in, and they were blinking their eyes and, you know, scrunching their nose or doing like this little weird head tic that I did. And I was like, oh my God, that was me when I was 8. So I was like, I can help these kids. I've just had such a fun time every year going back that I'm now the assistant camp director. I'm a member of the board of directors for Tourette Syndrome Camping Organization. And so it's just been a lot of fun and a really good experience being able to see these kids come in and not only help them with coping mechanisms and talk about Tourette syndrome, but also tell them what I do. Talk to them about the space program and talk to them about being an engineer and how Tourette syndrome in and of itself doesn't hold you back intellectually. Our brains work just like everyone else's, and they have the capacity to hold a lot of information just like everyone else. Tourette syndrome shouldn't be something that you should expect to hold you back from doing anything you want to in the world.
Ever since she was young, Marlene's ambitions have been sky high. Long before the movie The Martian showed us how to grow potatoes on Mars, Marlene gazed up at the bright stars from the potato fields of Washington and dreamed of one day going into space.
When I was 5, I told my mom I was going to be an astronaut. When I was in middle school, I won an essay contest at the state of Washington, the Migrant Education Foundation. They had a competition where you could write an essay about why you wanted to go to space camp. They selected 3 students out of the state of Washington, and I was one of the winners. And so the summer of 1997, I went to the U.S. Space Academy in Huntsville, Alabama, and trained to be an astronaut for an entire week. And I remember coming back from that experience in middle school and just having like this renewed idea and this like renewed motivation to want to do something with the space program because it was so exciting. And so I took all the math classes our high school offered. I took all the science classes. I did pageants in high school. So I won the town junior mess pageant my senior year of high school and junior year of high school, sorry. And I remember I was getting ready to go to the state competition, and there was this application for the NASA Space Grant Scholarship. And so I was applying for it, and it was due the Friday that I was going to be at the state competition. All the paperwork was done, it just needed to get post-stamped by a certain date. My mom had been telling me to do it before I left. I kept forgetting. So finally, the morning we're leaving to the state competition, she leaves the house to go put everything in the car, and I run into my room, grab all the paperwork, write a note to my mom, like, Mom, can you postmark this by January 15th? I set it on her bed because I didn't want to get in trouble. And so she takes me to Pullman, Washington, where the state competition was, drops me off for the week. Talked to her a couple days later on the phone. She's like, I mailed out your application. I was like, thanks, Mom. Come, mid-February, I get a phone call from the Space Grant Office at the University of Washington. They say, oh, you're a finalist. We'd like you to come in for an interview. So I said, great. Do you have to go to the University of Washington to get this scholarship? And they said, yes. I said, oh, I didn't apply to the University of Washington. I went to my high school guidance counselor the next day, and I said, I got this, opportunity to get this scholarship. I just didn't apply to UW. My heart was set on Gonzaga University since I was in middle school. And so my guidance counselor called the University of Washington, and she just kept calling admission counselors until she could find one that was willing to accept a late application. And so they said, drop off your application with this specific woman. She's willing to take it, but you have to hand deliver it. So I said, okay, I'll be there March 1st. And then February 28th of 2001 was the big Seattle earthquake.
Good evening. Here's the newest information on the earthquake just into our newsroom.
The 6.8 quake struck at 10:54 this morning. It was centered 11 miles northeast of Olympia. It was felt as far away as Whistler in British Columbia, Portland, Oregon, even Salt Lake City, Utah.
More than 200 people have been injured, most in King County. Some of the wounded are still trickling into emergency rooms.
And many people are homeless tonight. Their apartments and houses damaged beyond safety. Hundreds of buildings are
so
also
an earthquake
damaged.
hits Seattle. I show up the next day. The whole campus is shut down. The registrar's office, where the admissions office is closed. And so I go in for my interview, and I tell them, I said, I need to hand deliver this application to this specific woman at admissions. And so they offered to do it for me, thankfully, and came home that night. Our car broke down. The car wouldn't come out of fourth gear. This is the worst day. So we end up at the top of Snoqualmie Pass with a broken down car because it was snowing and there was a blizzard and the car wouldn't come out of fourth gear. And so we had to get a tow truck and sleep at a hotel. And then finally made it home. So April rolls around and I get 3 envelopes. The first one I open says that I got the NASA Space Grant Scholarship. I'm so excited. And then the second one I open mentioned full ride, but I didn't quite understand it. So I just put it to the side. Opened the third one. That was my admission to the University of Washington, which got me really excited. But then I kind of went back to the other one, and I was like, how do I apply for this? I really want it. So I called the registrar's office at the University of Washington, and I was like, what's this Costco scholarship? This sounds really exciting. How do I apply? And they're like, no, you won it. Your application to the University of Washington, your application to the scholarship, we're giving you $52,000 to the University of Washington. So that pretty much sealed the deal.
Marlene embraced this opportunity and studied aerospace engineering in college. That brought her one step closer to her dream of working on missions to space.
I didn't want to go back and work in the field or clean hotel rooms. I thought if I could get an internship, then I don't have to do all these other crazy jobs. I worked at the University of Toledo my freshman summer, and then I worked at the University of Wisconsin my sophomore summer. And so when my junior summer was rolling around, the NASA Space Grant Office they were going to pay for 2 students to come to JPL and work for the summer. And so I sent in my application, and then I spent the next 10 weeks of the summer as the propulsion lead for a mission architecture group. And then the following summer, I worked under Matt Gollenbeck, who is our landing site selection lead here on the Insight program. He hired me into the geology group my second summer here at GPL, and so I counted rocks for an entire summer for Matt. They were on Mars, so it's kind of cool. So what I was doing that summer was trying to find the probability of Phoenix hitting a boulder upon landing.
The Phoenix mission in 2008 was a NASA lander very similar in design to InSight. It landed near the North Pole of Mars. That lander scooped up soil and analyzed the chemical composition.
And so that experience comes into my InSight experience in the sense that whenever we have to set up the workspace, Matt Gollenbeck has given a probability of how many rocks or boulders or any type of geological structure we're expecting to see. And so I can set up the workspace with the idea of knowing what Matt means when he says 10% coverage of rocks. I'm like, oh, that's not a lot. Okay.
Marlene had moved beyond counting potatoes to counting rocks on Mars. But even after 2 internships at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, also known as JPL, it wasn't a straight shot to getting a job here. When she graduated from college, she applied to several aerospace companies and ended up at Lockheed Martin. She worked there for a decade. She met her husband at Lockheed. They had a child. Her husband had worked on the InSight mission years before, and eventually they both ended up back at JPL. As Marlene told us earlier, she's the testbed lead for NASA's InSight mission. Her group reenacts everything the lander will do on Mars, using a model of the lander that stays here on Earth. The engineers dream up all the possible things that could happen to the mission. They run test after test, practicing everything. One of the things they do to mimic operating the lander on Mars is work in the blind.
Once we land on Mars, the only eyes we have are the eyes of the camera. So the only thing we see is what the camera shows us. We as a testbed team will go in and we'll set up the workspace. So we'll put rocks in specific spots or different spots, and we'll have like different tilts on the lander, different tilts on the workspace. And then we'll take all of the imaging that the lander will take on Mars, then we send those to the team and we say, okay, here you go. Here are all of your pictures. Where do you want to put the instruments down? And so then they get together and they look at all the pictures and they discuss where the best place will be. The team writes all of those sequences and then they send them to us, the testbed team, and then we go into the testbed and run them. And we can't tell them how it went. We just run all of their sequences, take more pictures, and then send it back to them with all of the data and say, here you go, this is what it looks like. They're in the blind, so then all they have is the pictures to go off of, and then they can try to figure out what their next step is going to be. Whenever the team is working in the blind, they work during the day. We have to come in and run everything at night. The spacecraft has its normal sleep-wake cycles that are timed so that once we're on Mars, we want to wake up whenever Earth is within our sight so that we can transmit all of our data to the Mars Odyssey satellites and the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. So sometimes that's 2 a.m., sometimes it's 4 a.m. So spacecraft will wake up, we'll run all of our sequences, and then we'll beam all the data up to the satellite, and then we'll go back to sleep. When the team is working in the blind, we call ourselves little testbed gremlins, just because no one sees us. Just stuff happens in the night, and miraculously all the data's there in the morning. So that's good for them. Not so much for my sleeping, but one of our engineers came to us and said, I would like to blind the camera, cover the camera with something very dark, so that it can't see anything, there's no light coming in. So we went in and we blinded the camera, and I thought, that's funny, we're putting an eye patch on the lander, and I thought, oh my god, it's One-Eyed Willie.
Haven't you ever heard of that guy, what's his name, the pirate guy, One-Eyed Willie?
One-Eyed Willie! Yeah, he was the most famous pirate in his time. My dad told me all about him once.
Dad'll do anything to get you to go to sleep.
No. See, One-Eyed Willie stole treasure once. It was full of rubies and emeralds and diamonds.
Just because I'm a huge Goonies fan growing up. So I asked him, I said, can I name it the One-Eyed Willie test? And he goes, sure. So that's on all the test documentation for the test bed. It just says One-Eyed Willie test. And obviously they're all controlled requirements and tests that we have to perform, but it's just it's nice to have some fun with it and just, I don't know, pull some of your childhood back into it.
The test bed where the model of InSight sits is called the sandbox, but it's not filled with your everyday sand. In fact, it's reminiscent of One-Eyed Willie's treasure.
And what it really is it's crushed garnet. It is a precious gemstone. If you ever Google raw crushed garnet, it just looks like reddish, brownish, gray rocks. And we use this crushed garnet because it's
虽然这里叫沉默岛，但其实这整个地方都是沉默岛。
We use it because it has the same kind of properties
实际上在星球上
which is what we call Martian
是在这么一个
dirt or
地
soil.
方。
Here we
是
call
在这
it
一片
Earth,
大洋
the-
之中。
You know, the ground is the earth, is not only the Earth, but it's called Earth. Whereas on
我
Mars,
找
we
到
can't
的一
just
个
call it
小小
Mars
的地
because
方
people
叫
get
做
really
沉默
confused.
岛。
So we call it regolith, and the regolith has the same types of properties.
其实这岛
as
还是
other
很
stuff
大，
here on
你以为
Earth,
很
but the
小，其实
closest
还
we
是很
can
大
get
很大
without
很大。
having dirt or dust in our indoor test bed is the crushed garnet.
If Insight runs into any
这个
problems
岛的
getting
面
those
积有好
instruments
几
on
个
the
劳根
ground,
武的地图的
engineers
面积，
can
我
use
看
the
了大概
test bed
8个，
lander to troubleshoot. Once they've figured out what to
就
do
这
in
么
the
一个
test
小
bed,
小的
they'll
岛
send the，
大概是
commands to the
8个
lander
地
on
块
Mars.
，8个地块就是8
After
个滚
Insight's
武地图的
instruments
大
are
小，
placed on the ground and
太
start
大了。
operating.
有
If
没有
no
更
other
小
problems
一点？
arise, then Marlene's work is
这还是
done.
太大了。
But she still has ambitions for more.
I still want to be an astronaut. I've applied 3 times. I applied in 2008, 2012, and then 2016, because it's every 4 years. And I have all 3 of my rejection letters framed at home. And they're basically just
可以去
reminders
海
that
边，
I'm
但是
not
它
done
大到
yet.
离谱，所以
I talk to a lot of people about my Tourette syndrome, and when I talk about that and I want to talk about wanting to be an astronaut, I often get asked, like, do you think they're going to let you be an astronaut? And I say, well, I don't know. They haven't told me no to my face yet, so don't tell yourself that you can't do something until someone else tells you, no, we're not going to let you in. Then you're, you know, and then there's other battles to fight. So I'm just going to keep trying.
Next time on a mission.
If you look at the history of exploration, there are many disasters along the way to those fabulous discoveries. If you're going to be in a business, you have to pick yourself up and keep going ahead.
If you like this podcast, rate, like, and share us through your favorite podcast platform. We're #NASA on a mission. Also check out NASA's other podcasts, Gravity Assist, Rocket Ranch, What's Up, NASA in Silicon Valley, and Houston We Have a Podcast. They can all be found on NASA's podcast page. We're on a Mission, a podcast of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
真舒服，我靠，这就是我的度假了，好吗？随便找一个星球，在这散步、探索、勘探、拍照、观景，然后一边听着 NASA 的播客，听他们徐徐道来这些NASA 的往事，以及一些太空的有趣的事情，很放松。一边自己探索太空，一边听他们讲。
I have something for you, Captain.
Any adventure you can fly away from.
Engines firing. Here we go. Looks peaceful from up here, doesn't it?
沉默岛。
All clear. To land this ship.
What's next on the agenda? Saving the world? Saving the galaxy?
Saving fucking nothing. 我不想 saving 任何东西，我只想过我自己的太空人生和我的旅行。
Always a pleasure.
有点太长了，但是。
I feared the great serpent himself may have needed to avert his eyes at some of what went on last night.
你们两个在门口看什么呀？
Not on your mind?
Started. What? 现在已经1点半了，我们今天就先到这儿吧。明天再见，拜拜。